Hello. Let me get everybody pinned here. We'll start in a couple minutes. Okay. So I'll make you co-host as well. And then I'll spotlight. Yeah, hi. It changes the spotlight again. It just shows spotlight for everyone. Should I spotlight one of you?
I think I can manually do it then. And
okay.
Then when we switch, we can just manually do that. Yeah, that should be fine. Thanks. They did change it. I'm not sure why.
Yeah, I try to update my Zoom client, and so hopefully that helps.
Okay,
How
yeah.
do I spotlight myself? Because sometimes when it goes to me, it says something like, do you want to unmute? And I say no. So I just click that off. But what am I supposed to do something?
You can do it yourself by pressing the 3 buttons in the corner, and then on your picture.
Oh, I see.
Yeah, or I can always.
Everyone?
It would just spotlight you when you're on, and then I could always like do it for you when we switch.
Yeah, they changed it to, it's called Spotlight for everyone now. Yeah.
So I'll let you worry about that, unless you want me to do something.
Okay. Yeah, so I made you both co-hosts so you can change it.
Okay, awesome. Thank you.
All right, so I'll drop in the files while we wait a little bit in case. Thank you for waiting. It's just gonna be a little bit. Let me get the files dropped for some of the students that's trying to add the class. Okay. And we have exciting things this week. This is the first course. Well, the last course for many of you, and the first course in the security non-credit. Okay, so I will put in the notes and the assignment. Yeah, did it go? Oh, it only dropped one. Okay. So, all right. I added the notes in the assignment for those students who need the files. I'm going to go into screen share and we'll talk about the class procedure. Yeah, let me get on Canvas real quick. So everything is released on Canvas. You can find the information on there. So if you are looking for Zoom information, course material, everything like that, it's available on Canvas. And if you finish the last networking class with me, you will find it on, your grade is sent to the non-credit team to post for WebAdvisor. I try to have them fix the issue that that we were having, which you can't see your grade in transcript. So they're working on that. I hope they got that corrected. Okay. Let me double check and make sure. Okay, I'm sorry, I have to kind of mute everybody. But if you have any questions, please unmute and ask, or you can also type it in the chat. I will occasionally check the chat when I started going through the assignments. Okay, so you got the files in the chat. I didn't pop in the syllabus. However, you will find that on Canvas. If you need it, I can send that to you. So let's talk about the syllabus real quick. This is a non-credit course. So your target grade will be a C or better to get a passing grade in the class. In this course, we will talk about cybersecurity topics. We will talk about the type of career that you can get in cybersecurity. And that's exciting because there's always job in cybersecurity. Now, a lot of the times we have to start out in IT to transition into cybersecurity, only because they're looking for experience, of course. And I will add into the course announcement again, your apprenticeship form. I read the policy for the non-credit courses, so I'm going to try to submit the mirroring so that way if you want to test out for some of the credit course, or if you wanted to use the hours for the 3 course for something else, you will have that option. And it does take a little bit for them to approve it, so hopefully we will get some result by next semester. So once it goes into your transcript, you can always talk to your counselor about either testing out for maybe like CIS824C or one of the CIS courses, depending on the content. And then we can look at how you can also group them up and be able to use the hours for an existing course. Okay. We're going to talk about trickery and human error. And this is a big area that we see in cybersecurity, in such that there's a lot of the things that we can do to teach the user how to secure their system. We'll touch on devices and how to look at security with data and assessing that. If I can, next week I'll demo a little bit on how password is cracked. Let me see if I have on my virtual machine and how that's gonna run. I might use a different laptop for it, so I can show you how that's done and how quickly that can be done on a virtual machine, so you can see. Maybe. Okay. We'll talk about access control, and today we'll start with regulations and restrictions, a little bit on the threats and risks that's involved in systems. We will also touch on what would be a proactive approach compared to reactive approach in cybersecurity, and that's important to see. Okay, so your learning outcomes, you need to be able to distinguish threats, vulnerability, risks, and impact in the business systems. We're going to begin that today. We talk about different type of threats and risks. We're going to talk about how to implement practices that you can use to protect your system and yourself. Right? We're gonna look at how privacy is a requirement, and how that would correlate with social network, the larger network that you access via the interweb. Okay. The book is optional. I put everything together in the notes. So as you see in the drop file in the chat, but I geared everything to focus you on getting Security Plus. Some of my former students, or currently they're enrolled in my other classes, they took the class, and then they took the certification exam. And one of them so far passed, the other one, he's gonna take it next week. I do take late assignments. We are closing out this course right around Thanksgiving. So I wanna make sure that we get everything up by November 17th, which is when it's after the last session. So we want to be able to get your grade in and submit it, okay? And it does take a couple of days for me to wrap everything up on Web Advisor side and on Canvas side. So I have to export everything and send it to them after I finish grading. So here's the late assignment requirement. If you submit late work, you do get some deduction. If it's a couple of days late, I don't really deduct, but if it's a week late or more, then I would use the scale here. We will have in-class assignment weekly, so it's a way for me to have you follow the lecture, ask questions, so that way you can understand the concept. Since we don't have reading materials, we're going to use our notes. There will be hands-on projects, so there's 2 that's going to be for us to complete. So I want you to get some of the resources that you can use for personal. So the hands-on project this week is going to address things like encrypted messaging, encrypted email, what kind of tools you can use for that. Okay. And then we'll have a second one. And I try to gear it where everybody can do it versus having to use a certain system and such. So it's a little bit more challenging to design. We will have weekly quizzes. So we have a 10-question quiz every week. It's just for me to assess how you understand the material. Okay. And the quiz is linked to Canvas. For art grading, you want to get a C or better in the class to pass. And below that, that will be no pass. So it's going to show up as NP for non-credit pass, and then NCP, something like that for, or NCP for non-credit pass, and then NNP for non-credit non-pass. And so for the grade criteria, 20% of your grade will go into quizzes. 30% of your grade will be weekly participation, like attendance and assignments. 30% of your grade will be activities related to the lab. And then 20% of your grade will be hands-on. Ideally, if we were meeting in the classroom, your hands-on project would be totally different. I would give you a virtual machine and you would be able to do a lot of different things. But because we're unable to do that, we can only
watch me. No, I'm gonna be.
We can only use the resources that we have, which is the web. All right. So I require that everybody attends, and because non-credit is measured based on hours of attendance, so I do reserve the right to drop the students if the students missing class multiple times. Please respect each other's opinion, and also, your behavior in the class is correlated to the requirement from the college policy. Do your own work. And in this class, I write most of all my assignments, so you will not likely to find some of the answers on the web unless it's a general question. So don't copy and paste other resources without citation. And if you have accessibility requirement, like extended test time or additional resources that you need, make sure you contact DSS so that way they can set up appropriate form for me to follow. and also work with you to get the proper resources. Okay. My contact information is on the last page, and I do hold office hours this semester outside of class. The reason why it's scheduled like these is because I have other classes, so I wanted to make it where some of the other students can also access my office hours to get help. So in the case you have questions, you can send me email or you can drop by office hours. The information is here. Okay. And I respond to email very quickly. In general, if anything, that will be 24 hours. But I usually check my email throughout the day. So if you have any question, if you send a Canvas message, that will be best. It will actually connect to my email and then I will respond back using my email or Canvas. Any question regarding class policy, procedure, or syllabus? Okay. So let's get started with the first module. I want to share with you how we work this module. Your weekly plan is located here. It states my projected assignment plan, and this can change. So when I change assignment due dates and things, I go in here and make modification as well. Okay, so it gives you an outline on what that would look like. Also, if you look at modules, I put in some resources for you for the class. So here it's under the Moreno Valley resources, and in MVC resources page, there's a laptop loaning program. So in case if something happens to your computer, you can borrow their computer. However, you can't really install a lot of things on it or anything actually, but you can use it for Zoom and access the web and writing assignment. So if you have questions, you can also post in Q&A, and I occasionally come in here and look if you have posted questions, and other people in the class can also address the question if they see it. Okay. Here is the security resources and certification. So if you have issues with computer crime, you can report it to Homeland Security. The link is located here. And they have really good resources on how to use some of the online resources. They also have some training that pertains to Homeland Security that's required for their agents and the people that work for them. And then there's some announcement and blog information. So if you're interested in that, you can read up. Okay. So now if you want to report, that will be the button here. Okay. And then about national risk and some of the things, you can find that there. Okay. This is Department of Homeland Security. For most of us that deal with businesses and how to implement security, and when I do consulting, I use NIST publication. They give us a really good framework on how to go about addressing some of the areas and working with regulations. So here are some of the guidelines. So a lot of the times we refer to the documentation to resolve a lot of the problem. And it can go from the scale with botnet attacks all the way to government checklists to smart home privacy. So you can read some of the resources if you're interested in a certain area. Okay, and they update these throughout the year. So because technology always change and you would see different revision of it. And then if you're interested in certifications and career, I had posted this in my video, but this is done by NSA and Homeland Security in a way to just recruit more people into the field. And if you click cyberseek.org, If you look at the interactive map, it gives you a big picture on what type of jobs is in California. So if we select California, you can see the ratio for the job. It's, usually 2 jobs per individual. So we don't have enough people in cybersecurity. And then the type of jobs that you can see is located on the right. Now, let's say that I'm a student and I passed my Security Plus and I have gotten some experience with apprenticeship. Drastically, you can change how you will be able to earn your income. Okay, so it gives you different areas of job numbers and also the type of certifications that you can obtain. Now, you notice that there's a lot of people that have Security Plus. But as you move forward to some of the more advanced certification, which requires some experience or a lot of experience, you have less of a percentage. So your objective is not just to get a Security Plus to get into the field, but to get into some of the other areas as you acquire experience. These certification, you cannot test for them unless you validate your experience. So I previously prepared for the CISSP, but when I look at the job requirement and also the income, it's really not worth the time that I need to put in because I will either get the job regardless. So in some cases, when you get into the field already, you might not even have to continue some certification unless your company requires it. So the people who get CISSP is they wanted to be executives like CIO, right? Chief Information Officer, CTO, Chief Technology Officer. And with that, you make top pay. However, you have to manage the entire facility. If something happens, you could be the first one that loses the job. So like in the Target case, right, when they got breached, their CIO was the first one that got fired. So you can see the type of requirements or certification there. And then if you click career pathway on cyberseek.org, you will find different areas that you can get into cybersecurity, right? Like if I wanted to be a technician, what would be the expected salary? And remember that these require experience, many of them. So you wanted to start as intern or apprentice, so that way you can get there. After a year or two, you usually see your salary jump tremendously, okay? And with the specialist, you can get into different area like analyst in the mid-level, consulting in the next. You can be a pen tester. So there are different type of jobs that you can see there. And usually they're 80,000 and up. So the jobs look really good and they're highly demanded, okay? Now, if you want to get into the engineering side, you can look at system engineer, and you would start with some of these and move into the mid-level and then get into the security architect. I have many friends that operate in this or executive level. So some of my former students, I've taught security for over 15 years. Some of my former students are CTO and CIO now. One of them is Glba Casino chief information or chief. Actually, he moved into operations. So he used to be the CIO of Glba Casino, Stephen. Okay, any questions? And you can always connect with me on LinkedIn. It's a good way to also market yourself as LinkedIn. I do have many former students that are always looking for employees because now they get into management. So if I see that, I will repost it. But you can also find connection on LinkedIn as well. Any question? My LinkedIn is connected to my Canvas profile. So if you wanted to see what that is, you can click on my profile. All right. there's link to Security Plus, so you can take a look at that. Moreno Valley College is a partner, so we do get discount for students. I'm trying to work out a way where we can either sponsor a student to take a test. They're still frowning on buying individual voucher, but we're working on that. And then if I have to find a way where you can buy it directly from us, which is a lot cheaper than what they have. But you do have some membership discount, so all else fail, you can access this, sign up for a membership, and you can take all the CompTIA as a discount rate once you have the membership. And it's free with the membership, right? So the membership is free and you get discount for testing. I will have the study material directly from CompTIA. That's what they allow us to buy. So maybe, hopefully soon, I'll be able to release that. Okay, our district is looking at the request that I submitted. Here's the Microsoft one. So if you wanted to do the Microsoft certification, especially for cloud like Azure or SharePoint, you can also look into Microsoft certification. I might be able to get this package with the product that we bought. So touch base with me after or during the class about this. Okay. And it's a little cheaper than CompTIA certification. It's only 127. And what we did was we bought Certiport. So I might be able to give you this for free with Certiport. I got to check the license with that. Okay. So this is similar to what you see with Security Plus, but it's geared for Microsoft. And then there is a Cybercorp Scholarship. So if you do transfer to Cal State San Bernardino, I think they're using some of this along with some of the scholarship that they got from state. Now I linked the FAQs page for you just to show you what kind of requirement they have, but you can also go to the main page to be able to see how you can apply for it. Okay. So this is a scholarship to increase cybersecurity students. Like I said, there's a shortage of it right now. And I think, I've studied cybersecurity years ago. I knew it would be a hit. Throughout the years that I was working, it's always been in demand. It's just, people just heard about it, but it's been around for a long time. Okay. All right, so that's some resources for you to check out on Canvas. Sorry, just a change of weather. I'm losing my voice. All right, so let's talk about the fun stuff. I'm going to go over the notes. You can find the notes on the notes page here. Okay, if you want to download it. And if you download, you just click this button right here. Or you can view it within here. Now, if you click the next page, you will find the assignment. So I'm going to look at the notes and then I'm going to answer the questions while I'll go through it. Okay. All right. So just a little bit about myself. I started my career as a technician. As I told some of you at the beginning of the first class, which is the A. And I was a field technician for approximately a year or so, but during that time, I wanted to get into the networking side of the house. So I got some training from the field manager and I knew how to do some of the stuff. Then I transitioned after a year to as a network administrator. And then from the network administrator, I moved over to system admin because I wanted to learn more how to manage database and applications. And then during that time, I got certification with Microsoft. So I have the whole suite. And so I was a certified Microsoft professional. I also obtained some of the CompTIA certification prior to entering the field. And then I started studying security, and so I moved over to the security side. And my job required me to be able to test networks and things. So I was in-house pen tester. And so I later on moved over to teaching part-time and consulting on the side. So I quit my job as a system admin after a while. And then I transitioned over to purely doing field work based on consulting, meaning that I signed a contract and I would have certain amount of time to come up with a report for the company to fix. One of the recent one that I did was for a bioengineering company. And I can't tell you too much about it, but it requires some of the things with nanotechnology for a military base contract. I'm currently a Cascade Catalyst advisor. I work with DoD organization in the internship. I'll reshare the link if you want to apply. We got new companies that are looking for interns now that deal with terrorist surveillance, a lot of the different things. So I advise the intern that work for those company, and I deal with the CEO and the employers directly to help the students. I was on the phone with somebody yesterday, and they're looking for interns, and they're doing terrorist image recognition. So they're looking for interns that are interested in that area. So I'll post a link for you to apply if you're interested to do that. Okay. All right. So let's get started with a little bit of history. And some of you probably know some of this information and some of you might not. So I want to share with you some of the major incidents. So cybersecurity is not new. I think a lot of people think it's new because, the things that they see in the media, the things that they see as far as, what would be relevant to their daily life, but this has been around since the 70s. Okay. So Sarah, I'll address your question in a little while. Okay. And so, all right. So cybersecurity been around for a long time. So I want to give you a little bit of background. So Bob Thomas made history because he created one of the first worm, and you can look this up on the internet. And the worm just basically show a message saying that this is a worm and it's infecting the system. Okay, 1 second.
We should exercise after. We actually have time. I think it'll be a good idea. It was actually pretty good breakfast.
Okay. In 1989, Robert Morris created the Morris worm. This is famous. If you look him up online, he is currently a professor at MIT. He served his time for committing computer crime. As you see that the Morris worm was released in 1989. In 1983, they passed the Computer Fraud and Abuse Act. And as he committed the crime, he went to prison for some time. Now he's a lecturer at MIT. Okay. So this worm was known as the first denial of service attack in this history because he found a way to cause damage, and he utilized vulnerability, which is security flaw in the Unix send mail application. using weak password. Back then, the damage was estimated to be between $100,000 to $10 million, which is a lot for 1989. So this is a well-documented incident. So if you hear about Morris worm, that was the first one that used for denial of service. Okay. And when we say denial of service, all that means is just getting the systems to be so occupied with specific requests that it can't regularly operate. Okay. And the first Trojan that was documented was the AIDS Trojan. And so when we say Trojan, what we mean is it's a code or a malware, which is written in programming language, right? That masquerade, it hides different things. Okay, it hides malicious actions and different things. So back then they used floppy disk. Okay, so also in 1989, AIDS were documented. This was also used for mailing lists because that's when we started to see more email usage or mail communication in the computer. Okay. Now it was easy to remove, so they could quickly just get rid of it. And now with the existing virus, what you see is you would see historically where all the virus would come from, because the source code were available via the web or through Exchange. People would take the source code and modify it, and that's how really the spread of virus really came about. Okay. Now, as you know, McAfee was the dominant entity in the 1990s for anti-malware. And so was Norton, which later became Symantec, and Norton became one. But in 1990s, antivirus products really escalated because more viruses were born, more malware were born. But malware been around for a long time. So it's just a way to cripple, right? A system. Could be mail, it could be files. I didn't document the I love you virus, right? Where it capitalized on the file name and it hides the extension. So people think it's a love note and they open it up. So the virus really needs the human intervention. It requires you. A lot of times they would use social engineering to trick you to download something and run it, to open something up. And with that, what they can do is they can change the behavior of it to make it stealth, meaning that it would lay in your system for a long time, right? And it's also a logical threat where it would wait for a course of action. So let's say that it would wait for you to click on certain things, or it would wait for certain logic to happen and then it activates. Or it could be a time bomb where it would sit there for days, right? 20, 30 days. And when that day is reached, it would activate. And that's, from a programming side, that's could be simply done. You just have the conditional statement incorporated and say, if this happens, right, this is the result. And so now, there are a lot of YouTube tutorial on viruses and how to write one. There are a lot of resources online that's floating around. Our government monitors it, but it's a little bit difficult to enforce some of the things on the web, as it could be spanned across the world, right? So that's a little bit on the malware, and the difference between the virus and the worm in such that the virus needs you. The worm itself propagate, meaning that it doesn't need the human to activate. All they want you to do is to visit a site, to access certain resources and it automatically activate. Later on in the notes, I put down that there are water holes or watering holes. These are websites that have malware, and there are many of them. Our government go back and we trace back some of these websites are stemming from China and some other part of the world. Chinese government deny all claims, of course, and there are websites that are put up for national state security. So to really infect, right, some of the traffic in the web, and then they attack other ways. But according to some statistic, a very high percentage of water hole websites or watering hole websites are placed on the web by Chinese entities. So you do see some of the research that's going to go into that, right? And so with that, let me check the web. So the virus needs you. The worm doesn't need you. It self-propagate. That means that it activates on its own. You don't need to install anything, right? You can, it can launch on its own, and sometime, some worm are more malicious than others. So
Professor?
yes.
But the worm getting on there on your computer in the first place, I mean, that could be done many ways, but
Yes.
traditionally that can, like, there has to be some human interaction for it to get on your
Yeah.
computer, correct?
Yeah, so there and that comes back to social engineering. There has to be some, and a lot of it comes from web browsing, right? Like the way that they have is they just place it on a site that activated because you have browser add-ins like Java or things to run, right? And it would run in the back while you're visiting that web page. Yes, so you're right. There is some intervention, but it can transfer by people passing it to you without your intention. So they have to intervene. But the whole point about the worm is that the worm doesn't need you to install. The virus does. It wants you to open, right? So when you get those chain mail, and that's how it used to spread, it would say that, oh, this is a celebrity, open up the picture to that, oh, open up this file to see the latest picture, I don't know, of Kim Kardashian, Kanye, whoever, right? Beyonce, whatever. And that's how they would get you to really be interested in downloading. And so the virus really needs you to open the file, to install something, to run it. Where the worm, once it gets into your system, it does its own thing. So it's automated in a lot of ways. Now the Trojan would be something that you commonly use. Let's say that I'm playing a game and I'm trying to download a cheat package, right, for a game, so that way I can move on to the next level. And so in that package file that I downloaded, it hides malicious code. Okay. And so with that, when I run it, right, it can keylog my password every time that I access something on the web. Okay. So they can write it to keylog your information that you enter. And as you enter it, it would either put it on the list and send it to a certain entity because it's coded that way, or it would create a list and store it somewhere for, later access. Yes.
Can I ask another question?
Sure.
In regards to what you just said, I don't know if anyone remembers when people's Instagrams accounts were getting hacked. I don't know, some still are maybe, and like they would get like these DMs that said like, "Oh, here, I made this for you. Click this link," right? And then it takes them to an Instagram, quote unquote Instagram login page,
Mhm.
And I remember when I got it, and I was like, no, Instagram within the app would not ask me to log in again. And so what would happen then, my theory, I figured it was just a key logging attack. So like when you type in your username and password, it automatically goes to them. And then that's
Yeah.
how people's accounts kept getting hacked. Is that correct?
Yeah. Yes. And the same thing happened to Facebook. So
Okay.
what they did was they utilized Facebook, who owns Instagram, right? Weakness. So because they know that, you know, there's privacy issue that Facebook was having challenge with. So there are people that could directly message you and then they send a link, right? And that's an easy way to get key logging. One of my former students, I have them demo that. I'll see if I can invite some of them to show that at the campus when we come back. They do this for a living. So it's really cool in that, you know, you can totally put a UI for the user to see. From an attacker standpoint, that is cool, right? And yeah, all the field that they put in, it automatically creates a file, and then it automates that file and it sends it to whoever that's supposed to receive it. Or some cases you can also keylog using USB. That's why you should never plug in a USB if you don't know where that comes from, right? Be suspicious. And when you plug in the USB, you see nothing, right? So what it does is it hides, it has hidden file, and then when you plug it in, it activates it. But you're right. So what that was, it was keylog, and they do that a lot. Be suspicious when you get FedEx and UPS notification that's outside of their scope. Like, you know, UPS had the issue where they would send an email saying that, oh, you have this package that you never really bought, right? And it, you know, enter your information for us to be able to help you track it. So they later fixed the problem, right? And that went on for years. So key logging is a cheap and easy way to get people password. They're not going to sit there and decrypt your password. It takes too much effort. Because cracking password will take a long time, especially complex ones. So they just trick you to do it. So, you know, and you can set up your spam rule and your filter to really address some of that coming from email. Right now, they're saying that mobile attachment with multimedia and direct message and SMS malware has escalated like more than 70%. And you know, I told this with my last two class, there's only 60% at most of malware that's detected by these companies. They're always reverse engineering some of the malware, and there are unknown malware all the time. So we're not completely safe by using anti-malware, but having it is just, you know, a measure. Okay. So we'll talk about embedding things into pictures shortly. Yes, you can embed a lot of things in files, right? Images, different types of file, so that way people don't see. Okay, so a little bit on the web. Netscape was the first company that utilized security for web browsing. And this was about 1995. I graduated high school in 1995, right? And so Netscape uses SSL, which later became a weak protocol. We don't use SSL as much, even though they fix some of the problem. SSL caused the issue called Heartbleed, where, you know, somebody used the vulnerability in SSL and attack a bunch of web pages. You know, because SSL was used with HTTPS for authentication. And as you can see, it was written way before 1995. It was implemented in 1995. So, you know, I tell my students that want to get into the engineering and the architect side, read the protocol RFC. It will tell you so much about that protocol, and you can use that to learn more on how people are using the weaknesses of the protocol, because we use the protocol for communication for different resources, but we still find different areas of weaknesses. So this is why you have different releases of the protocol. So now HTTPS uses TLS version 4. So what you see is we transition to use a different protocol instead of SSL, which is secure socket layer, for connecting to secure website with authentication and validate you are who you are, for banking, for transaction, for paying bills, a lot of things, for school, right? So let's answer some questions, right? Coming back to the assignment. So the first question, who created the first computer worm? That's Robert Morris, or I should say Professor Morris. And in 2003, Anonymous attacked Church of Scientology, and they are hacktivists. They hack for a political reason, usually. And anonymous group is very large. So if you just Google, right, like hackers or hacker group, you see lots. Now there's lots. They document a lot of them. But they were one of the first few. So for us in the United States, we acknowledge them as the first one that really attempt distributed denial of service. So what's that? What's the difference between distributed compared to denial of service? Denial of service have one attacker and one target, right? They can occupy one server, right, from one system, that so much that that server would go down. So we would see things like web server shutting down. After a while, they would do Smurf attack, meaning you can ping someone to death. So there are a lot of different type of denial of service attack. Okay. Now, distributed denial of service means that they would have many systems that would attack that one target, right? So because their group, their community is very large, they can use the resources in the community, also take over people's system, make their computer become zombie. And now this is the area where we start to see botnets, right? But when they take over your computer without you knowing, your computer becomes what's called a zombie. And they would use your system resources, processor, RAM, etc., connection, to be able to attack that one target. And that becomes more efficient for them because they don't have to use a lot of their resources, right? So what will happen is they would get the user to click something and then use that code to make the system zombie and to take over, to remotely take over that system and attack someone else. We are doing a better job at detecting this area for most part from a business perspective, okay? Because we are defending in different areas. But I think overall for general public, I don't think that we're doing enough of a job to educate the people to really see what it is, especially the people who are not growing up around technology or new to technology. Okay, so Anonymous was the first documented group that attempted distributed denial of service. That was in 2003. And some of you, right, were born right before. So when I was teaching this back in the day, right before that, we talked about denial of service, but distributed denial of service because of also technology availability. You don't see a lot of that before, like connection, network connectivity was limited. Okay. Some of the more recent one, the case, and you can probably have heard or seen some of this. So TJ Maxx went through a time where they lost a lot of money and they caused a lot of damage. There was 45.7 million credit cards that was breached, or credit cards that was leaked. And this is between 2005 and 2007. Estimated loss was higher than $256 million. And it took a long time for TJ Maxx to bounce back. Okay. So when they investigated, they caught the individual. So this individual was sentenced to 40 years in prison. And after prison, he's not allowed to touch a computer again. Right. And so now, right, Target, TJ Maxx, you know, some of the companies that had previously gone through breach, they had equipped themselves. Target was multiple time. When they got rid of the CIO, then they brought in someone, implemented solution, the attacker came back, and then they revamped their network. And the Target case, it came from the HVAC. So backup lines sometimes opens up issues on your network, so you really have to protect it as well, right? Okay, so it gives you a little bit of information about TJ Maxx, and then we start entering the era of ransomware. So ransomware is a program or source code that demand money. I read some of the recent one that they published. Whole new ball game, right? We saw a lot of the crypto stuff that was coming through before, like it would encrypt the hard drive and hold it for ransom. Sony went through a phase where, right, they have to pay up the money to get back some of their system, and likely you won't have the data back because it's a, you know, even if they give you the key, you can't decrypt it. So it's a loss. There's some recent case with San Bernardino School District, and then also in Texas, right? Texas lost a lot of their data and they decided not to pay. So they started from scratch. They would use their backup to pull the data. But internal blue was a thing that NSA leaked. So they exploited the SMB protocol, which is mainly for Windows environment, to share files across the network. And many applications like Zoom originally have SMB, Skype, stuff like that. So that way we can drop files. Okay. Shadow Broker leaked the protocol in 2017. And then they changed it up and they converted it to what we know as WannaCry. And that was a big thing. That was in 2017. It was used for ransomware attack with health in the United States and in Europe. So later on, they fixed the problem, right? They launched the fixes in OS side and some of the other areas to fix the issue, but it became something else shortly after that. NotPetya was a revision of WannaCry, and they target a whole group of entities. So banks, you know, utility company. It wiped out one of the utility company in Ukraine for 2 days. It took out one of the city for 2 days. So imagine, right? You can't do anything about it. You just have to wait. And so they would tell you what to do. And so that way you can turn on the system so the people in your town can get electricity. It's a scary thing. Okay. So from a nation state perspective, you know, will this be something that we're concerned about? Definitely. right? We're looking at utility company and how that could impact everyone. How do we communicate? We use power for everything. Do we have the proper backup, right? Okay, so here kind of give you an overview. I'm sorry about my dog. Someone is trying to get to the front. So banking Trojan, right? That was the later on type of malware. So you can list so many different things throughout history, but you know, it's just these are some of the major incidents that we see. So Eternal Blue is the answer for the next one. It exploit SMB, which is used to share a file across the network. Okay. And you know, Zoom had the security at the beginning because of their weaknesses with the protocol weaknesses and how it's used. And so then the regulations that came out. So this was implemented not just with us, but worldwide. So Computer Fraud and Abuse Act was something that was very simple and plain. It was something like if you have unauthorized access to the system, or if you circumvented the system, or if you're trying to exceed the access, right? Then you're violating a computer crime. And then as technology advanced, they had updated this particular regulation. Now, when someone committed the Computer Fraud and Abuse Act, right, it could be fraud via email, it could be a lot of different areas. You know, there's different term or sentence for the individual. There had been hacktivists that had, many of them had gone through, and then this comes back to our recent thing with Snowden, right? He committed the Computer Fraud and Abuse Act. They're looking for him. They can't touch him. He has valuable information, right? He still holds. So that keeps him alive and going, right? So he's in a different
Professor,
country now. Yes.
wasn't a recent case settled in the Supreme Court that said that what he violated was actually, it was the CIA spying on us, was actually infringement on the Constitution, so he could be cleared.
Yeah. Yes.
Which is recent, right?
Right. So yeah, so because he came out and said that, you know, they were monitoring a lot of people, right? And you saw some of this in the movie. So possibly that he could be clear. But you know, yeah, FBI could have gotten him. They were at the airport where he was at, and he was on the side where, you know, we have to be able to get authorization to enter. However, there's still a lot of the things that he holds that's essential. So yeah, he's trying to clear, and possibly he wants maybe to come back, right? That was the whole point. But you know, so there's a lot of discussion about what is really our rights, and you know, what is the violation. So when this first came out, the clause was not very clear. Was it, you know, really truly define access, what access is, right? Or what unauthorized access is. So they didn't really clearly define that. But so I pulled up the manual for this, and you can find this online. So to prosecute computer crime, you can go through all the sections, and I can share this with you if you're interested, right? So now our government has gone back and specify all the areas. So as you can see here, here's the sentence: obtain national security information 10 to 20 years, usually 20 years. Accessing computer and obtaining information 1 to 5 years. So like I told you, if you were in my networking class, be careful, because if you think that you can scan your neighbor and trying to get into your neighbor network, that's a computer crime. And if they have evidence of that, right? Everything has digital footprint, okay? small pieces or larger. I teach forensic right now, and I show the student you can find a lot of things. So be careful, right? I know that sometimes you're curious. The best thing to do is test your own network. Use your own resources, and that's how you can advance your skill. Trespassing, okay, 10 years, accessing defraud, transmission. So this kind of give you trafficking passwords to people that keylog you and sell password. If they're caught, that's at least 10 years, right? But sometimes that will couple with other computer crime, right? Not just one area. It will be multiple areas. Now, that might not seem a lot, okay, but you know, they will monitor you. You will not be able to have access to computer system, live without having a smartphone, a lot of things. I had previously worked with someone that had committed a computer crime, and as he was going back into the field at the beginning, there was a lot of restrictions in what he could do and he couldn't do, even though his capability is so much more, right? So, you know, his passion was this is what he does best, but he got caught doing it, and so illegitimately, and then he ended up being in prison for a while. So I had worked with him through a contract, and there was a lot of limitations. So what he can do is he can tell other people what to do, and not be able to attempt it himself. So, you know, so kind of give you a little bit of information. You can find this on the web as well. If you look for the CFAA, prosecuting crime. Okay. I see some of you put some stuff in the chat. So let me check it real quick. Okay. Yeah, that's fine. All right. So kind of give you a little bit of details. Now, in the bachelor program, like at Cal State San Bernardino, or even in the master program, a lot of this will be revisited. In some of the upper classes, like risk management, we revisit it. So you would hear this again. And then I'm only giving you a very quick summary. So, you know, if you want additional answers, you can reach out to me, or we can talk about it another time. Okay, so let's talk about HIPAA. HIPAA protects patients and insurer, right? The people who obtain insurance, getting health care, so that way other entity cannot just obtain your prescription, your medical history. The Department of Health and Human Services implemented this. It was really carried out in 1996. It was later updated. So recently they had updated HIPAA requirement. So that way you have to authorize even doctors to be able to obtain your past or history with your medical records. Okay, and that comes back to privacy rule. And privacy rule is really aimed to protect our health information, or HII. I have a whole certificate that's focused on this. There's a huge demand for cybersecurity people that knows how to work with HIPAA. And in their guidelines, you have to really break it down. So it really gets into the technical part with encryption, what kind of encryption you use, what wireless, what kind of encryption you use with email, how can you protect the data in specific area. So there's specific requirement from the technical side, like how, when you transmit data, if your patients is accessing the record online, what, you know, these are the baseline protection you have to have in your facility. And some people, they won't convert it to digital data because it costs them more, and then they'll just be fine with this. Okay, any question on HIPAA? So with the next one, which is GLBA, that's big for financial and credit card company. So with GLBA, This was originally known as the Financial Modernization Act. Sorry. It was enacted in 1999. This is how they protect your financial account and your credit card information. So any companies that's taking credit card transaction, like Amazon, like your bank, they have to implement Glba, and sometimes they will contract that out to the company that does it. So for example, when you go to the store like Walmart, Costco, Target, you see these POS devices that take payments, and that belongs to a different company that they lease. So that allows us to protect customer sensitive data, your credit card information, your transaction information. This also requires them to hide or not print your complete bank account information. It only gives you a certain digit. Sorry. Okay, any question? Okay, so FISMA in 2003 was implemented to make sure that everybody follows a framework. And as I mentioned, NIST is a good resource for you to use. Government, they use NIST and other resources. So that requires a lot of the public entity, schools, city, county, etc., to really follow a certain guideline. Okay, and that was part of the process there. Okay. All right. Next, I talk about Sarbanes a little bit. So Sarbanes-Oxley Act, this was named after the judges that were pursuing the case. Enron shredded a lot of papers and they deleted a lot of the data on their system in the early 2000s because there was insider trading. There was a lot of fraud activities with Enron. They created fake investment account under different names and get people to put money in, and you know, they took people's money. One of them was a sub energy company. If you watch the movie or the documentary, it talks a lot about it. So because of that case, we came back and we wanted to make sure that the people who are on the stock market really report their financial status, their spending, their expenses, their gain and loss quarterly, and the SEC governed that. Okay, so Sarbanes-Oxley really addressed the companies that are on stock exchange: Facebook, Google, Starbucks, Coca-Cola, Microsoft, you name it, right? Anybody that's on stock exchange would be required to follow SOX or Sarbanes-Oxley. And then for you guys, that's FERPA. FERPA would pertain to protecting your grades, attendance, student record information. So in order to release it to university or other entity, you have to permit it, you have to authorize it. So I had a former student that ended up working for NSA. He's over in Virginia now. When he was going through the process, they showed up, right? And they asked for my grade information on the students, his records, his behavior, anything in his file. So I was able to provide that. So with FERPA regulation, you have to authorize an adult, right, or someone to be able to access your resources. So you have to permit it, okay? Even with family members. Okay, let's answer the next few questions. So the regulation that require financial institution to protect the privacy of the customer data would be Gramm-Leach-Ribley Act, GLBA. You can put GLBA if you want. Okay. And a lot of this stuff is just knowing the resources, right? Security is about knowing the tools, knowing the resources, knowing the information, so that way you can have proper implementation. And there's a lot of regulations that's, you know, and there's changes in that. Okay. All right. So the golden 3 for cybersecurity. We always wanted to know, right, what kind of data we need to protect because we need to achieve CIA. Confidentiality, integrity, and availability. That's the golden 3. No matter what you do, you have to achieve these 3. Okay. So if you're a pen tester, you wanted to look at what's available, how is the system available, how can someone take that away from a company, right? What's the type of, how can you change the data and make it not have integrity? Is it confidential, right? So in security, we look at these 3. Those are the goals: confidentiality, integrity, and availability. So let's talk about each of these so you can be clear, because a lot of times people don't understand the difference between one to the next and what kind of things we need to implement. So confidentiality means that data can only be accessed by specific user, authorized user. So we would implement username, password, account. We would also assign user privileges and permissions, right, to access. And we'll talk about access management next week. And every company that operates, that's able to do business in the United States, have to have some kind of confidentiality with their data. Okay. Whether it's for customer, employees, or their own operation. So your goal in confidentiality is to prevent unauthorized disclosure of data. Okay, that's our main goal. To prevent unauthorized disclosure of data. So we can use encryption where we can make plain text into non-readable text. We can cipher it. We can manage access control. We can use steganography and obfuscation. This is, we can hide data, okay? Like earlier, there was a question about embedding pieces of data in the files. Sure, you can do that. You can make it not visible for people to see, because if it's available for them to see, then they're gonna try to access it, okay? So here it talks about encryption, what it is, and we'll talk about cryptography down the line, maybe in 2 weeks. Now, with access control, there are 3 things, actually 4, but there are 4 things you need to focus on. First, you need to identify who that user is or that group is, right? So this is how we have username or user ID. Then you have to implement authentication where it would issue some kind of security token for that user, for the session, or for that system. Third is when you issue that security token, what you allowed them to do is in authorization, allowance, or not allowing someone to do something. And the one that I didn't mention is, it's called accounting. Is to really not just have the user be accountable for their action, which is with implementation of policy, but to log it. We have to make sure that it's monitored and log. Okay. Now, a lot of the things, and you can read research all day, will tell you that the issues that we have in security comes back to access control, every area. Okay. And some areas pertaining to the user, but if we tighten down the user access capability, we can prevent a lot of these things. So access control is one of the main keys to really fix some of the problems that we have. Okay, so here it tells you what each things are, and then it talks about steganography, a practice of hiding your data. Okay, and the attacker, they can hide it, right? The people who's trying to hurt you or your network, they would hide it, they would embed it in a certain file. We can do the same thing to protect our file. So things like, you know, essential design for our planes and our jet planes and things like that, then yeah, we want to be able to hide that so it's not accessible for everyone. Okay, so for the next question, we would put down CIA, confidentiality, integrity, and availability. That's the entire purpose of a security professional, really. All the practice that we do falls into these categories, these three goals. Okay, I'm going to expand on the integrity part a little more. The main goal in integrity is to make sure that your data doesn't change. Okay, no modification from the time that it transmits till the time it gets to the destination. No tampering or corrupting data. So one of the things that we can use is we can use hashing. It's a value that we can generate to calculate that type of data, right? So let's say that I'm trying to send a file to my colleague, right? An important file. I can use hash to generate this key value. And when my colleague receives that file, right, that person can calculate the hash to make sure it's matching. If it matches, it hasn't been changed. If it doesn't, it's been modified. Okay? So hashing has been around for a long time, but you know, like any tools, we have flaws in the hashes that we use. And you see a lot of the hashing with software, right? Digital signatures, you can use that to certify that you are who you are on the web or in a system. And we can use digital certificate, right? When you install an app, it asks for these certificates. And when you allow them to access your camera, your contact, all of these things with the apps, it puts those things, those privileges for the app on the certificate. And until you uninstall that app, it's always going to refer to that certificate to access the resources on your smartphone or on your system. And that becomes a vulnerability because, right, somebody can look at that and say, oh, I can capitalize on that. I can go into the system through the app. Surveillance camera, smart TV, same issue, right? There's not a lot of protection on those things, but they are fixing some of that with firmware. This is why you have to update your firmware. Okay, so certificate, we use a lot for different areas, from cryptography to digital signature to controlling a lot of the resources. Non-repudiation ties back to accounting or accountability. You cannot argue that it did occur at that time, or we cannot change it, because it creates a timestamp, a log of that event, right? That action, that incident on our system. So let's say that I use digital signature to send an email to a company, like a loan company. With that, it generates a timestamp, right? And that ties with the signature to show that I signed at this time and it occurred at this time. So I cannot argue that, oh, I'm not who I am and I didn't sign at that time, right? Because it ties the user identity to the system, and that system has this event that's tracked. Okay, so digital signature gives us a little bit of the integrity. You should use it with other areas, just not use one. And also authentication. Question? Okay. So availability, right? In networking, this is what we do. We care about how our system's available, right? 99.9999%, the 5 nines. Okay, so you want to focus on making it available 99.99% of the time. So how can we do that? We want to make sure we have redundancy, right? We're saying backup in the loose term. Backup of data is just file storage of that same data, okay? But backup system means that a secondary or third system or a site that would have the same systems. So I mentioned in the last class or in other classes, I said that now a lot of companies use mobile backup sites. So in the case of storms or even man-made disaster, like what you've seen, you know, bombs, fire, right? People torch down the building. We would be able to have tolerance of that. We would be able to accept that risk and then move on and reduce it to a small amount. Okay. Making sure that we have services without interruption. This is difficult to do, actually. So if you get hired as a network administrator, a lot of the times they will tell you, this is the resources that you have, and you got to make sure that your network is up more than 95% of the time, because that's what we use, right? Imagine train, plane, bus. If you don't have your network up a lot, you're not going to be able to have train or ticket booking, people traveling to the right places and such. Okay. So as a network administrator, you have to think about how can you make sure that it's available, right? We have to have backup of a backup, right? And if we don't have the resources, we have to find other ways to supplement. So remove single point failure. If you have one server, one router, they're going to attack it. Okay. And when you use the book, that's really pointing back to chapter 9, which is planning. So you can use like RAID, which is multiple disks to be able to store your data, backup data. You should have a failover cluster, a group of servers that's just sitting there for backup, but that costs money. You can virtualize, cheap, right? Affordable, easy to maintain, and it's available for you. So we have the technology to implement that. Okay. So here's the site information. So when we say hot site, which is things that are available 24/7. Example, I own a store, let's say in Moreno Valley, and I sell equipment. And a hot site of my store would be another store that in case my first store closes down for disaster problem like tornadoes or earthquake, I can go to the other location and pick right back up. Okay, so hot site available at any time. Our government has this. Cold site, empty room, no system. nothing, bare minimal. Okay. You can move some of the equipment and the people there once you need it. And many times companies would have hot site in different country, right? Different continent, and also cold site in different country and different continent. This is why Facebook have data center everywhere, not just because there's a lot of data, right? Of course, there's a lot of data, but they wanted to spread it out. So you have one on one side of the coast. So they house their data in New Jersey, and then one in Portland. They contracted with a company to do that. And then they would house their data in, I believe, Denmark and some other nations. So you see them spread across the world. So in the case something happened in one location, they have other areas. And it's expensive to do. Okay. So when you consult, sometimes that's your job, is to design this, to plan it out, right? And that could be millions of dollars or more. Okay, so let's answer the next question. So to achieve confidentiality, I ultimately think that it comes back to the user as well. Okay, because it's very easy to phish information. I used to have a shirt that I stopped wearing publicly because people ask questions. And it says, I'd rather be phishing. So it's really easy to phish out information. You can call, like the scam call that you get, right? You can send an email saying that you're so-and-so from Dell, Microsoft, or the own company, to get the user to disclose their information. When I taught forensic a couple weeks ago, I showed them a case where the user has sent out a list of customer to a third entity that falsified to be internal employee from HR. And when that data leaked, we have to find out where that went to. So we have to take a look at the email that it went to, the server of that email, and the server that connects to that server. So, you know, it comes back to the user. Implement permission control, what files that they can access. So when we say permission, we really mean file. Okay. Use least privilege policy. Least privilege means the least that they can do on that system. Least privilege pertains to system, like shutting down, installing application, stuff like that. That will be privilege. And sometimes you don't want the user to shut down or restart, because if you allow that, right, sometimes you overlook the other privilege, so they can install, and most of the installation require you to restart the computer. So that's why some administrator would not allow the shutdown. They also want to push certain updates when that system is on, and then you can do like wake over the network using LAN wake. So there's a lot of things that we can look at, and these are the 3 areas. Okay. All right, the methods to achieve integrity, you can use hashing, digital signature, certificates, and timestamp for logs. And for 9, if we want to improve availability, remove single point failure. One system, one router to the network will be a single point failure. We have to have multiple points, and we want to protect those multiple points of entry. Make sure you have backups and failover systems. Redundancy, backup lines, but protect the backup lines. Patches and updates. So a lot of the security area is in the networking side. This is why when you study security, you have to be well versed with networking, because it comes back to how these systems are interconnected. Okay. Okay, so let's talk about risks and threats. Any question with these? So when you design a security plan for home or business, you have to have different layers, okay? We cannot just have one solution that's going to work for everything. So when you're looking at integrity, you have to implement multiple things. Okay, that's why we list multiple things. Because if you only have one layer, that can be easily be corrupted or destroyed. It's very easy to override something. All right. Okay, so let's talk about risk. Risk is a likelihood of a threat that's going to exploit the vulnerability, resulting in a loss. And that could be people, internal threat, right? That a lot of the times we focus on people attacking us, but we forget about our employees within, right? And sometimes they would put people inside to get that, right? You've seen this in spy movies and such, also real life cases. And I tell my students the easiest person to impersonate is the janitor, right? Because they have access to all doors. Nobody looks at them, right? Nobody questioned them. So this is why you see movies portraying that. And in field testing for cybersecurity, sometimes you have to test the physical parameter, like if you can get into the server room. Yeah, one of my students, he tells me that he did the job for San Manuel and he almost got beat up by the security guy over there, which is, you know, from a perspective of the company, that's good because they're protecting their parameters. So he was trying to come in and access like different rooms, different server rooms and such at San Manuel Casino. And yeah, the security guy followed him all the way to his car. So first he sat in his car and pen test the network, and then he has to test he has to do USB drop and test their technical area. So he has to be able to go. So he has to come in looking like, you know, the first time he said he came in looking like the IT guy, right? With the badge from this company. And then the second time he has to come in as a customer. So he was wearing short t-shirt and a baseball cap. And yeah, the security guy followed him to his car. So I see some things in the chat now. Jeff, for 6 and 7, just to be real quick. CIA, confidentiality, integrity, and availability for 6. And then for 7, train user not to disclose information, implement permission control, and use least privilege policy. Everybody got that? I love security, so I might spend a little bit more time talking about different areas because it's really cool. It's fun to learn a lot of the things that we can overlook quickly. Okay, so we'll go till about 2, take a break, and then we'll come back. If I don't finish this, I'll pick it up next time. Okay, and I'll change the due date if possible. Okay. All right, so, and you can find this on the notes as well. Risks, threats. So let's talk about threats and vulnerability. So the threats could be people, it could be disaster, like natural disaster, it could be malware, right? So there's a lot of different areas that we look at threats. This is why when people get fired, they have to clear their desk and leave, and we need to lock their account. Because as I mentioned, like throughout, you probably heard me, 80% of employees use their old work data to leverage their next job. So it's not necessarily the person's data, it's the company's data. So, and then when they don't get a raise or they don't get what they want, sometimes they would leak the data, sometimes they would accidentally or even intentionally destroy data. So people becomes a huge threat. You got to look at that. Vulnerability is a weakness, and that's through design and implementation as well. Weakness in the network, weakness in the device, weakness in the application, weakness in the configuration of the system or the network, and weaknesses in the user, falling for the tricks. So that's a vulnerability, right? So if you don't train your user, they become a weak target. They become a target because they have weaknesses. Okay. Any incident that pertains to security would negatively affect confidentiality, integrity, and availability. Denial of service attack, an incident. Malware infection, an incident. Okay. So if it affects the confidentiality of your system, the integrity of your system, and the availability of your system, it's a security incident. Okay, and you have to remedy that. So if you have a threat exploiting a vulnerability, that will be impacting your organization, becomes a risk. We cannot remove the risk 100%, but we can reduce it to where we would accept it, or we can transfer it. What do I mean by transfer? So let's say that you know that you don't have the resources to house all the essential data at your company. What you can do is you can get a cloud company to provide you with that resource by paying them. And with that, they also have to protect your data up to about 50%. And then you have to cover the 50% or more. Sometimes it depends on the contract. Okay. So if we don't have the resources, we can, instead of buying all the equipment, we can pay someone to do it, and we can transfer some of that risk to someone else. It's like buying insurance to drive, right? It's, potentially there might be accident, and we pay for insurance so that way they will cover some of that, right? That will cover the financial risk behind it. So we transfer that to the insurance company, and we do pay insurance for data. Okay, we pay insurance for our equipment, stuff like that. So security incidents would entail these. Okay, accidental loss, you do see some of that. Like they accidentally send out a bunch of social security number to so-and-so, right? Attaching the wrong file and so forth. Or when they print it and they threw it in the trash, that could be a problem for us too. Okay, so I touched on risk mitigation and the control. So there are two areas of control that we look at. How can you control? Technical control and administrative control. Technical control, we govern a lot of that. We can configure, we can install tools, we can monitor, we can do a lot of the control technically. And then administrative control ties to the business, the operation, and the training. Okay. So the technical control, you can use a firewall to block or allow traffic, certain traffic. You can detect malware. You can control by policy, setting up user accounts and group membership to perform certain tasks. And then the administrative control, you have to reduce the risk. You have to assess the vulnerability. You have to pen test your network parameter and your system parameter. You have to be aware and train your people. And you have to make sure that you implement change management and configuration management. This is a requirement for some regulation, like SOX. They want this documented and proof of it, that you've done configuration and change management in the organization. Okay, so some of the executive and the decision maker, they gotta make sure that this is carried out. Okay, so let's answer a few more. Okay, so we touched on 9. For 10, it says a risk is defined as the possibility of likelihood that a threat exploiting a vulnerability resulting in a loss. Provide an example. So I just picked one, would be employee leaking sensitive data, right? And if you want to use the one that's historically documented, internal blue is, you know, that was an issue going back to exploiting the vulnerability with the protocol. And that was the risk inside the operating system and the application. A threat and a vulnerability for 11. A threat could be people, could be malware attacker. A vulnerability would be unpatched software. And that could also include firmware, not just software. Open door or unlocked door. The lack of knowledge or training. Okay. And then for 12, the type of control you should implement is technical control and administrative control. And technical control can pertain to firewall configuration, account configuration, password protected accounts. Those were some examples. Administrative control pertains to training your users, and by regulation, we have to do it at least once a year. Most companies would do it twice a year, right? Require them to go through the training. Or when you change your rules, your policy, you have to train the people again. So when you make new policy, and you should change your policy over time. So things like when the campus was still open and when you're trying to access the wireless network at the college, right, either at RCC or MVC, when you accept the agreement when you go on there, right, that means that they can remove your access in the case you violate some of the rules. You cannot use it for certain areas, right? So companies have specific rules that they want to implement for the technical system and for the user. I really think that a lot of times people are aware of the rules, but they don't know how to go about applying the rule, right? They know how to use a computer, but they really don't understand how to safely use a computer, what to look for, right? Because they have learned how to use a computer throughout their life, could possibly pick up some bad habits. Okay, so I really think it's important to implement the step-by-step procedures on how to do things. Okay, and also teach them on how to be able to use it safely. Like, don't pick up a USB and plug it in. Okay, turn it in, right? Don't download everything that you see. And if you do download, this is what you should do. You should scan and then download. Okay, question. Okay, so the threat actors could be many. Could be people from the inside, your employees. Could be hacktivists. We talked about anonymous, and in that section it gives you a little bit more, but there are quite a few groups that do that worldwide. And anonymous, if you don't know, right, they wear the mask, the white mask, and that's their signature. And when they attack someone, they would attach a video and link it to the resources. So that's their signature, is to sign it as anonymous, saying that this is what we did to you and you better fix it or we'll come back. Okay. Now the script kiddies are the dangerous ones. Okay, so here it talks about media protection. I mentioned physical control. I'll come back to this shortly, but the script kiddies are the ones that just download source code and tools online, and they don't know the type of consequences that they'll face. So they will launch these things not knowing the consequence. And sometimes they do. They might know the consequences and they would have the targeted attack type, but it's a different scale of attackers, and we'll come back to different type of hackers and attacker. But script kiddies are quite dangerous. The tools are very cheap to buy, right? I tell cybercamp and cybersecurity students this all the time. Your data is worth less than $3 a piece on the dark web. So if I want to buy, and it gets less every day, if I want to buy an Excel spreadsheet of people's social security number and all of that, finding the right sources, I can pay less than $3,000 for 1,000 record. And this is how identity theft is exchanged, or information for exchange, is to use different resources on the dark web to buy and sell things. You can buy a good malware for less than $10, and sometimes they sell it with, for the more expensive things, they'll use cryptocurrency. And so this is why our government really, was frowning upon cryptocurrency outside of some of the, some of the other issues. But script kiddies are quite dangerous. Okay. And some of you might already attempt some of the technique that script kiddies do, like you found something online, you download it, right? So when you're cracking password, you're just a cracker. You cracking password or cracking a software, right? That is a computer crime. You're violating copyright, you're violating somebody's product, you are exceeding your the access capability. Okay. So there are many different areas of it. Okay, so insider, hacktivists, and script kiddies. Just to touch back this section real quick, I removed some of the questions that I would normally ask for Security Plus, but we talked about physical control. Okay, these are the things that you should get for your company: lighting, fences, security guards, doors, surveillance system, fire extinguisher, and they have different type. There's like the Halo system, there's the Halon system, there's the water system, which could damage your computer. Now, we want to be more with the instead of reacting to an incident, we want to be proactive with the incident. So you should have preventative control, okay? And it's an ongoing process. So these are the areas: change management, have security awareness training, patching your application, installing different patches, and then change the default configuration. Never keep default configuration, okay? And then detective control, meaning how you're going to be able to detect. And so this is reactive. Logs, looking at trend for baseline, audit your system, requirement for regulation once a year or twice. So there's also a job called the security auditor. You can get a certification to do that, and you can contract externally, or you can be an employee. Your job is to audit different areas of the system, their data protection, their network, okay? And it pays pretty well, so I can share the resource with you next time on where to get that type of certification. Mr. Loya was launching a certificate for his classes with the auditor piece, okay? Corrective control. So most company will operate here and then move into the deterrent, because they would invest a certain amount of money just to react to the incident. So detective and correct. And you can be an incident specialist or an incident response specialist. You see the job listed like that. So you basically clean up the problem. You show up and you do your job. And sometimes you get hired from the outside. Sometimes you get work as an employee. Okay. So after the attack happens, you have to go find out, how did it happen? Where did it happen? What kind of data do you need to put back? And then we have deterrent control. So surveillance system is a good deterrence. Physical lock on the computer itself is a good deterrent. Hardware locks is a good deterrent. Warnings, right? Little background messages on the desktop is also a good deterrent for the user. Things like, we're watching. Don't access the web freely. We see what you do. I had worked for companies that store user cookies. They gather all the web history and user cookies for everyone, and then the software actually categorized those websites, and then people would get omitted or fired for, visiting unregulated websites and such. So, my job was to look at the logs and stuff for the cookies and determine, to get the developer to work with the application side to categorize it a little better, to give a report, and automate that report for the executives, the decision maker, the managers and such, and then tie that back into the security monitoring application. So that was kind of interesting. So yeah, companies can monitor all the web traffic. Network, we can see everything anyway. So sometimes people would do compensation with the control. Okay. Like single sign-on is a compensation. How when you log into your computer at work, it logs you into your email and it logs you into all the application that they have. So that way they can compensate for, the effort that they would support that, because people would forget their password and it would take time. but it still is a form of control. It's not the best form of control. I hate single sign-on and such that it creates so many security problems, but it is very on the very primitive low level. Okay. So for more information, please look at SP 800 for NIST if you're curious on how to implement this in a business environment. And for my interns that work with DoD, they look at this all the time, and then they have to work with the resources that the company have to help them implement or document some of this. Okay. We'll come to virtualization when we talk to about the lab, right? I will show you how you can also, I will put in some document for you to learn how to create virtual machines. But in our type of work, let's say the cool job, right, out of all the security job is the pen tester, the risk evaluator, the forensic investigator. Those are the three cool positions, because a lot of the time you get to really look at, you know, the different weaknesses in the different area, and you get to test it. You can hack for a living. You can find evidence like CSI for a living. So those are the cool jobs. A lot of the jobs are really monitoring, looking at logs, how fixing the problem, right? Even with those jobs, you still have to look at logs, and you still have to tell the company how to fix the problem. But we use virtual machine a lot to test. And whether it's virtualized through our network, or we would create virtual machines to test using Kali or other type of pen testing OS. And I can show you what those are. And also, you know, use it to test application that will be safely run, test rules and permissions and privileges for our system and files. So when you use a virtual machine for your lab today, you're going to see some of that, and you can always delete the virtual machine. You can always, you know, launch something with it, and it's not going to impact your regular OS. It's just going to contain in that section. But now, right, like going back to malware and how it would store in your disk. Let's say you download a malware on your regular computer and you wipe out the operating system. That malware still exists until it's overwritten by another file.
Professor?
So it doesn't always go away.
Professor,
Okay. Yeah.
is that why it's always a good idea to run stuff like that on an account that does not have administrator level clearances? So in case it gets on your system, it doesn't, you know, can't maybe get into some of the deeper stuff.
Yeah, it's a good practice to use a regular user account. That's a good point to bring forward, is that you should use your computer on a regular basis as a regular user, not as admin or root, right? Because at the highest level, you know, somebody can access something and get into your account and be able to access the resources that you have. So yes, you should use it. But a good way to also, when you're dealing with, like, sometimes you take your computer, let's say to a store like Best Buy, and they tell you, oh, I'll just wipe out your computer and I'll just reinstall your OS, and I will put back all your applications so they can revert it back to manufacturer and put all the data back. Okay, but that doesn't really get rid of the malware completely, because until that section of the drive is overwritten, it's still there. So just, you can zero out your drive to be for sure. Okay. And same thing with flash drive. Like when you get rid of your SD card, physically destroy it, because you don't know how easy it is for us to read your SIM or your SD. I just demoed my class last week on how to look at a SIM and see all the text messages that that person sent, right? Now, even if you remove your SIM, you still have internal memory on that. I'm sidetracking now, but in that smart devices, but it doesn't mean that they can't retrieve stuff on your SIM, because your SIM is a midpoint where your system communicate with your service provider. So it transfer and it sees everything. So yeah, the next time you dispose things, the next time you reinstall OS, just zero out things. And if you really want to throw your SD and your SIM into a fireplace, burn it, right? To be for sure, and physically destroy it. Because I've seen demo where people ran over smartphones and they can still pull data out of it. So like over a car and things like that. But all right, so let's take a 15-minute break, and then we'll come back and wrap up some of the things, and then we'll talk about the lab and the things that you have to do for your project. Okay, so I'll put myself on mute for about 15 minutes. So let's be back at about 2:18. Okay, so we're gonna start back up. I'm gonna turn off my video for a second, so just because we're on Zoom. Right in front of you is an attack map, and you can search for these just simply Googling digital attack map. Quite a few of them that are available now. Originally, Norse or Viking were the few companies that put together the map for us, and this shows you the distributed denial of service attack against our nation from other sources. And then we do have attack launching from the United States to other areas in the world. And this is tracked using protocols and port. As you learn in networking. If you haven't taken networking, it's a good class to learn for security. So we can utilize the traffic information, and we can see what kind of attack is being launched. So from a network standpoint, how do you know when you're being attacked? Is that you're going to have a lot of the same type of traffic going into a certain port. Massive amount of that same traffic is going to aim for that port, which is connected to that a certain system, right? That port number for a certain type of service. So what we can see here is visually we can map out if certain area is being attacked, and some of the network monitoring tools will show you, where's the source coming in. And even on some of the security appliances, it's really good at identifying where that source is, whether it's from different part of the world like China, North Korea, or in our case, we see that we have a lot of attack, and it tells you here coming from Thailand, Brazil, Nigeria, and targeting United States, different location in United States. Now, the map might not visibly show you everything, but it would show you the massive amount of denial of service traffic. So I dropped the link in your chat. So if you wanted to check that out, it does require good connection. So that way it can simulate it and show it to you. And then they give you the statistic based on this. I know that Viking is now supported by HP. And so there are some technical companies like Microsoft, they do some stuff with attack research. So you do see some stuff that's coming from Microsoft, from our country, and then going into other sources. So here, lately, we've been seeing a lot of traffic coming from South America. And we always remain within the top 5 country that's targeted. And so it could be individual entity like industry, businesses, and then some of the traffic would relate to government related activities. So you do see that there. Okay, so this kind of gives you a big picture on what type of attacks that's being launched. A lot of the times it's DDoS. Okay, so let me close this. And then let's go back to what we were talking about. Now we're going to get more into the threats. And then I will try to wrap up a little bit, like around 3, and we'll talk about our lab and assignments. So the threat actors, we touch a little bit on this. Hacktivists launch attack for a cause. A lot of it relate to political causes. So we do see some stuff going on as we're getting ready for re-election or election. So you see, and in the past, there were a lot of talk about our election system, how we can digitally vote, the flaws behind these type of system running older operating systems, and those are not being patched. So the issues come back to government systems that are not up to date, that has flaws. And so we do see attack being performed to get leverage or information about the competitor company. So I attended one of the Department of Defense seminar, and they were talking about how some government actually buy out researcher, like professors at Stanford, Yale, in different areas, like in bioengineering, in chemical engineering, or even in mechanical engineering on some of the development in technology and new type of materials, possibly for our military, or for, you know, product based that would be eventually for consumer. So and then they also launch attack to gather you know, planes and different type of warfare based system design to be able to gain some advantage as far as, you know, cyber warfare, and also related back to just the overall warfare. So organized crime is also big, and it relates to identity theft and some of the smaller area, but and the motivation with a lot of the organized crime is money, right? And this is what you see with ransomware. They would hold data for money, they would hold system for money, and it changes from one type to another. So it consistently keep the security people working. This is why this field is always in demanding, is because it changes so fast. And as soon as we have a solution for something, we have to move on and look at possible way to solve other problems. So to touch on persistent threat, it's really a targeted attack against a network. It could be a government network. It could be, you know, like for utility systems, for our water system, our electrical systems. It could be sponsored by certain government, right? Like could be from China. And there's a lot of talk about how China cultivate their attacker very young. Supposedly they identified the building where these people are being trained. Chinese government completely denied it. I had attended a seminar with DOD and they touched on that. They even showed the picture, right? It's a plain building, and it operates with, you know, hundreds of young students that they technically train for this type of purpose. And then, you know, we have some operation that would be similar to that. We would have our agents and people that would operate in specific non-disclosed building for secret type of things. So what you see is the advanced persistent attack really aim to target a specific network, and it could be sponsored by certain government or businesses or individuals. And it's very sophisticated. So a lot of the times we have to take a look at how we would layer our protection to really prevent or, you know, respond to that effectively. Because in the sense where if we only have a small measure or a simple type of protection, it doesn't really carry through for our operation. And so that's just an example of how they can attack. So like 1,000 servers at once, that can cripple the servers, and without the servers that could be issue. And going back to the physical attack, I mentioned in my networking class that somebody went into the manhole and cut the fiber cable to all the larger network, which is Cox and some of the service provider, and that cripple a lot of the networks, especially businesses, that they rely on that to, you know, have process transactions, store data, you know, use cloud, things like that. So we really have to take a look at how we protect the physical environment and the logical systems. And our train controller and some of the transportation controller now actually have physical protection, you know, locks and fences. How easy it is for someone to jump the fence and get access to these resources is still a question with some company that's offering utility services. So that kind of give you an overall idea on the deficiency that we have and some of the things that we might be facing. And then malware types is on page 8. So as I mentioned before, virus is a malicious code. It attaches itself to application and the files within the application. So when we say host, that could be anything. It could be a tablet, it could be a computer, it could be a network appliance. Because now we have appliances that have storage, large storage. Very rare that you see malware infecting RAM, and that really ties back to rootkit and some of the more malicious malware. But a lot of the times it would infect, it would remain or contain inside hard drive or secondary storage. So when you're looking at secondary storage for a smart device, that would be your SD, right? And then you have internal RAM that's also storing some stuff if you're looking at the iPhones. When you're using Apple system and when you're using Linux system, it doesn't remove you from not having malware. Like people say, oh, I'm better off buying a Mac computer, an Apple computer, because I will never get infected with malware. That's a false statement. It's just, it's less than Windows environment because Windows is prominently used in the business environment more than 80%. So you see people writing the malware, creating malware for that type of target. When I went over this with my security class last semester, we looked back into the statistic on this earlier this year. This was in spring. We saw that there's a huge jump in iOS, like 78% escalation in iOS malware and in Mac OS malware. As you know that more people are buying the system, that gives more of a reason for somebody to create it like that. So you're not immune to malware using Mac OS or iOS. It's just you would face it less compared to the Windows environment. And then Linux have some security measure only if you apply it. And in Linux environment like Android, or if you're using Arch Linux or Mint or Kali or Ubuntu, you would also see malware funneling in. It's just not as high. Okay, we talked about worm. It's self-replicating or self-propagating. Yes, it does need you to really get to where it wants to be, but once it gets there, it's really gonna spread across the network on its own. It's gonna really try to infect certain area. So we want to make sure that we are aware of that. And for the user interaction, what I mean by this is to really not launch a certain application. It's just gonna it needs you to really bring it in. And a lot of these things, it needs you to bring it in. And once it's in, right, it's over. So we have to have a network scan on that's running consistently on our servers and on our systems to really detect the malware. Logic bomb, I mentioned this briefly, but it's embedded into an application and it would execute based on certain logic or event. And that could tie to the logic too. And the way they program this is they would use logical conditions to implement it. So that way, when all of those conditions are true or met, it would activate it. And it's not difficult to do. Source code are distributed and available via the web, so somebody can take that and modify it. In the case where we were looking at Iranian government, and one of the things that we use against their nuclear systems were one of the viruses that was written Now, there was signature in the virus that shows that, you know, it's coming from a certain company that we have, a certain engineering company, but I'll find the video, and if I can find it, I'll link it for you. But really, you know, we don't know where that really came from. The source is still pretty hidden, but that was one of the malware that we used against the Iranian government back then, years ago. So historically, most of our software uses backdoor. It's a way for developers and you know, administrator to go back and implement these things without having to authenticate or link certain systems together. It's just to bypass regular authentication method. And attacker would use backdoor to get into system, and backdoor exists in many applications. Now when we train developer, when I work with developer, I try to tell them to find ways not to leave backdoor. It's not a good practice anymore, but you do see application that still exists that have backdoor capability, because the system itself needs to have a different privilege, a trusted privilege, to be able to access files and resources. And at the kernel level, it needs to be able to tie things together so that way it will work. So in that sense, a lot of the times the backdoor would tie to unlimited resources or resources that we don't normally see from a regular user's standpoint. So you do see issues with backdoor, and that's how, you know, attacker and things would be able to impact your system negatively. Ransomware control the host system to demand for monetary exchange or ransom. And you often see it comes in as a Trojan. So it masquerades as something that's common to the user. And then as soon as it gets into the system, it would encrypt, right? Like server storage and such. Or now what they're saying is they're holding account access for ransom. So some of the executive, the management, the people that's essential to operation, it finds it and it locks those accounts. It takes over those accounts. So that's the latest thing with ransom now. And then spyware monitor your computer activity, right? And the way we use a lot of the spyware is for business. And you know, your browser listens, your browser watches your activity. So spinning off from that, what we incorporate is some of our tools that we use on a daily basis. They use it for marketing purposes. So you can use your anti-malware suite or your security suite to be able to control some of this. Like I said, we can never remove the risk 100% of the time, but we can reduce it to where we can accept it. So if we have that knowledge, then we would operate it carefully. We would think about, you know, what would be suspicious and what's not. If you have any question in suspicion, don't click it, don't download it, you know, and that you need to instill in the children and different generation of user, because you might be very careful and the next person that use your system at home, they're not, right? They would download everything and you can continue to fix the problem, but it would not resolve it completely. I have some issues with my family member, not here in my home, but distant family member that consistently download things. And every time I would try to fix it, a month later, it would go back to the way it was. And, you know, they would have continuous problem. And so, you know, a quick way to really fix that kind of problem is to educate them, and you know, to teach them how to follow a certain procedure to do the right thing. So here's the information about the spyware. It monitors your computer and the user activity. And then botnets are, they call it software robots, right? But these are the software tools or the codes that's written, and it's used to look at information on the web and access resources on certain system or launching attacks or launching malware. It's used for different things. So, you know, they say about botnets and fake news, botnets and malware, that's very common. So you can launch it from multiple entities from a specific network, and they're really good at hiding these things, so you can't really trace back now. You can eventually, but it takes time to be able to footprint some of that. Okay. So my students always ask me, well, what happens if I spoof addresses, right? Like I use a fake address, I use a fake public IP, I use a fake MAC address. You can use a tool to do that. But remember that when you're entering a network, right, you're not just facing one system, one appliance. Let's say that we're coming in from outside and the first thing we're going to hit is your border router, right, to go inside that network. And with that, adjacent to it is probably a border firewall that's seeing who's filtering, who's coming in and who's coming out. So those are going to be, you have to bypass those two, right, from the outside. Then you have to, once you're inside, you have to make sure that you use internal address. And so attacker, they would spend the time to investigate how, right, the blueprint of your network, right? Like how, what's the layout, what's really going on, and they sniff out some of the activities using network analyzer, right? They scan. They would sit there and watch all the activity of, you know, packets going in, coming out. Now, once they enter and bypass the firewall and the router and all the other appliances that's protecting your network, then they would look for ways to like backdoor things that they can enter specific servers and system. And with that, they have to be able to tell the server that this is who they are and this is, you know, so there are procedures and steps that people use in ethical hacking from that standpoint to really enter the network and test the network. I did 2 blind jobs, meaning that they don't tell me anything about the network and I have to test the network, and I had 48 hours for each job. So that's a very quick turnaround time. And luckily it was smaller networks. So what I did was when I traveled to the job, and this was about a while back, I used 2 systems, 2 of my laptops, and I would scan consistently. So I would run multiple scans. And so when you do this type of job, you have to have good processor and good RAM and virtual machines, and you come ready. And so when I scan, I would started, you know, writing down, taking notes of the information. And sometime when you get there, you thought that you had all the details that you need. You don't find what you want. So you ended up starting from scratch again. So before that, what I had to do was I have to get as much information as I can on the company, right? Like what kind of information from externally. So I used some of the tools and I looked at their email servers and some of their servers, their web servers from online. And then so I can have a you know, a tiny picture of what that would be. So in some job, when you do this type of job, you don't have all the details, right? They wanted to see if an attacker, not knowing much about their network, how that person can get in. And in order to get paid, right, you have to be able to enter and get the information that you need within a certain amount of time. And then you give them a report on what you find. And then they take that back to their security team, and then their security team fix the problem. And that's the type of task that you see. Sometimes it can be frustrating, and sometimes it can be very fun when you find something that's very exciting. But you know, nothing too glamorous and such that, you know, you don't see anything special flying through the screen. You basically look at logs, and a lot of the areas you can see, you know, if you can access certain files with certain permissions, and if you do, you write it down on the report. But before I did that, I have to make sure I sign the contract and agree to the contract, because I don't want to be legally blind for the things. And there are many times I see things that I'm not supposed to. You know, I document it, but I don't look further into it because it jeopardized my contract and it jeopardized my ethics. So that's important to know. Okay. All right. Social engineering, the common tactics for social engineering. And then sometimes before you do those type of jobs, this could be your area too. Like you would pick up the phone, you would call, and you would pretend to be someone, and you can see if you can find out more information from their employees, right? You send an email. So the first thing is going to be flattery, or you can con them. If they are interested in golf, that's what you're going to target. And how do I find that? Easy. Google the person. Okay. If I know that one of their executive is into golf tournament, that's what I'm gonna focus on, so I can spearfish him. Okay. So when you spearfish, is you really target on that individual, that entity, and you focus on that, you know. So for some of the pen tester and some of the ethical hacker, that's what they also have to do, is do the human side, right? Like I told you, my student, he has to physically try to enter the secured area. And you can assume a certain position of authority. You can call, hey, I'm from Microsoft, right? And we know that Microsoft don't just call you to reset password. Or, you know, you get the phone call from IRS, that's assuming position of authority. Those are scams. So, and then also you can encourage people to perform risky action. So from an attacker standpoint, right, you can, you know, tell them, oh, I tried to do this, but I don't know why it's not working for me. So why don't you try it? Like, and let me see if you can try it. You know, I'm trying to download this file or, you know, access this server, but for some reason my credential doesn't work. Maybe because I'm new, right? And then also, you know, this is all of this really tie back to trust. Who do you trust and how you can establish trust? And, you know, some of the movies portrayed this really well. Impersonation, and sometimes that would take time for people. So they would send the people in to be the inside. So the DoD, they mentioned that some of the Chinese researcher, what they do is they cultivate them, and then they would send them to Ivy League school and to be part of different research. And over time, how the research material was leaked. And you know, I talked to the person that investigated those cases, and you know, he even showed like pictures of who they are, who they met. You know, they kind of followed them around. They followed their digital communication channel. So if that's something that you like to do, that could be your job. Okay. Tailgating is big. Follow someone in the building. You can just pretend you would stand outside with your smartphone and you say, hey, you know, you wear, you know, a fake badge, and you would say, hey, I'm sorry, my badge doesn't work because I'm new. Or you can just quickly, you know, wait till catch the door and then enter the building. Cisco, I've been to Cisco campus a few times. And yeah, good luck with that. I went out to my car for like a second, and then I tried to get back in. And then I had asked one of the employees to let me in and they wouldn't. So they're pretty well trained at Cisco. So those are some of the techniques for social engineering. And then Waterhole, here's the Waterhole information. These are websites that would have infections. So they would have malware, and that's how they used to spread it. Okay. And all of this is also in your notes. I'm just trying to get through some of the materials so you can see. If you have any questions, let me know. Let me check the chat a little bit. Yeah, people are always gonna do things habitually, you know, and a lot of the times it's out of curiosity. So some of the tools that they can use to, you know, do USB drop is the rubber ducky, which I had shared this in the past, but you can. Hack5 was originally, they started with 26 magazine and then they transitioned this. They have channels and things that you can look at, like their videos, tutorials, stuff like that. But Wi-Fi Pineapple to simulate the evil twin network where it mimic your wireless network and then it would take over and you can start booting people out. And then so you can take over. I hate that they have advertisement nowadays so much. And then there are different tools here that you can use to study, right? I don't encourage any illegal action disclosure. Dr. Wynn shares with you education information. We want to operate ethically, okay? So here's the rubber ducky. With this, it's actually just a micro board for the USB. And once you have this, you can use their website to download the tool that you need. So you can insert it. It looks like a regular USB. You can use it to, you know, see if the user will plug in the USB. And in a lot of cases, people would do keylogger with USB. And then that way they can test to see if the user have weak or strong password. So it depends on the security specialist, right, or the analyst. It really depends. Okay. So these are some of the tools. And there are other websites that sell these, but Hack5 is one of the main ones. And sometimes they sell out. So I have the largest Wi-Fi Pineapple and then also the little ones. And all of this is just having additional antenna. And then it runs Linux in the back. And then you would use something very similar to Kali tools to be able to do that. So, so you would power it using, you know, those USB power bank. And then, you know, you can connect it to the laptop and be able to sit there and monitor. So this is a good tool for somebody who wants to do, you know, wireless assessment. And then there are different resources, as I mentioned. So here you can see some picture of this. Okay. Now, can you make the Raspberry Pi into some of these tools? Sure. Yeah, there are tutorials for how to convert, you know, Raspberry Pi, some of the embedded Linux systems to some of these resources. Because, you know, but out of the box, you do have some of the stuff that you can buy. Okay. Right, any questions? Yeah, so it's about knowing what you see, you can use all kinds of tools, but if you don't know what it is or how to use it well, yeah. So security is about using the tool effectively, right? On both ends. So it's really important, but from a defender perspective, you have to know what's really out there to really defend and have proactive approach, because there's new development every day. So David has a good point too in the chat. All right, so for the last few questions, we're coming down to 3 o'clock now. We're almost there, hang on. So the difference between whaling and spear phishing is that whaling targets executives, okay? Earlier I mentioned that, yeah, I would target the executive that's into golf. I can send them an embedded golf tournament flyer, right? A fake one, and to see if he opens it up, stuff like that. Like I would, and then I would try to fish out by keylogging, what he types. So whaling targets executives. Spear phishing targets specific group of users, like your HR department, human resource, or financial department, health professionals, right? Doctors, nurses, people that operate in the hospital, billing people in the hospital. So spear phishing targets specific group and whaling targets executives. And earlier I mentioned that we can voice phish. We can call, right? Attacker can call and say, oh, well, I'm from so-and-so. I need to get this information. So that's called vishing with the V. And it's just engineering tactics through phone calls. Yeah, remember, companies and IRS, they don't call for those things. They show up. IRS will show up if they have questions about you. Okay. Microsoft and Dell don't call you because they need to reset your account. Yeah. So Pablo said it's true. Money is really the pool for all of this, right? And yes, there's question about ethics, especially with internal employees. So when the DoD people, when they talked to me, they said, what's your value, right? They asked me right off the bat. They said, if somebody needs to put a value on you, right? What's your value? And I said, what do you mean? What is my value? And they said, how much money do you think you're worth? And I said, I don't know. I never really think about it. A lot of the things ties to my job, right? And I wanted to make sure that, I'm operating in ethical realm. And they said, everybody has a price, right? Some people more expensive than other. And, so they were showing me the researcher cases. PhDs that works on secret stuff at, UC Berkeley, that that sells their research for a certain fee. So, that way they can gain a little bit more money or stuff like that. So yeah, that is true. There's some question about ethics when it comes to money. Now, when you're trying to protect your system from malware, run and update your system using anti-malware application. So today in the lab, you're gonna see how it shows you to use Windows Defender. Windows Defender is okay. It gets, some of the malware. And then you can also use third-party tool, right? But also install this on your smartphones. I use T-Mobile, and McAfee came with the service that I have. But you can also choose other type of anti-malware suite. Okay. And some are better than others. So the areas that I want you to see in anti-malware before we wrap up is this. Okay, so here it talks about rootkit if you're curious. That the malware functions on a few areas. Number one, on page 10, it talks about this is signature, which is there would be specific signature files, and this is how the anti-malware would detect it, the data definitions for the pattern. Also could be behavior that would be heuristic, where we would refer to previously known or certain signature that would be detected. Like I mentioned, there's not a lot of stuff that we don't know everything, right, about the malware, all the malware that's in the wild. We would know some, right, like more than half. So the design of this, and this is what you see with zero-day exploit, is that based on the vulnerability that they've seen in certain type of system and the weakness, they write the code for those things. So as soon as that system or that software is released, it's already have issues, right? Problem at the 0 day, at launch or even before. It's going to check for file integrity, right? If the file's infected, it would modify, right? And so some of that would go back to hash calculation. And then looking at data execution. So the anti-malware would look at that application file, and what it would do is it would prevent that application file to open or the application to launch and access that file. So when you containing the malware, it's just staying in one place. It might not infect the other areas. Now we shouldn't go in and delete those files, because a lot of the times, the majority of the time, it ties to the system file, because malware is known to infect system files. And when you delete system files that's infected, it caused your system to have problem. And this is why when you see malware, people starting getting errors and things, for some time, either they delete it or it makes it inaccessible to the system. So, and then, some stuff that would be tying back to web resources. So it slows down communication. It also take over resources in RAM and storage, where it would slow down,
Professor,
Yeah,
I have a question for you.
sure.
It's been my understanding, tell me if I'm wrong, it's been my understanding that it's usually not a good idea to have two different virus protection softwares on your computer because they can fight with each other.
Yeah, and they tend to be false positive, where they see things as threats.
Yeah,
Now they
but-
have some decent one, yeah. So, and then sometimes they see other things as threat, and yeah, so they would be conflicting. In the past, in the 90s and early 2000, the tools were not good, so we would compensate by installing multiple tools. And so you're
Okay.
right, you shouldn't have multiple anti-malware application on your system, because yeah, it's gonna also, it's gonna have conflict, and then they tend to be false positive, so they see everything as threats. But if you have one that doesn't, I'm sorry.
I said like 1,000 PUPs.
Yeah, of course. And then, the hoax one, the fake ones would try to tell you, oh, they would scan it through a website. That's a lie, right? There's no software tool to scan it through a website ever.
Yeah, no, never. I always feel like my grandma's like, oh, I saw this, I was on the internet and it said I have viruses. I'm like, no, you don't. It's fine.
Yeah.
No,
So those are hoax, hoax application. They're fake, right? And what, once they trying to get you to install something. So, and then sometimes they would take over resources, so they are malware themselves. So what, yeah, if you're trying to scan something, you can download the executable or the application file and then run it. They have some good ones now. I look at some of the ones, but if you have the false positive ones that's not seeing the threats, right? You start noticing that, like, it's not doing its job, then you should uninstall it and then use a different one. And some of them takes different ways to uninstall. You have some of them you will have to go through their website to do that, to unregister. Some of them you can just simply uninstall, like in the Windows environment through Control Panel. And then, okay. So here, there's some more information about, social engineering. And all of the malware and all of the threats that we talked about, it capitalized on human trickery. So the weakness link really in the network is the human. Seriously, like I say that all the time, but people say, oh, what do you mean my users are perfect? I said, okay, let's see if your users are perfect, right? Like we can put it to the test real quick. Let me send I will tell you what happened. So I'll just send out a mass email like, oh, here is the presentation from our last meeting. This is what happened. So you should teach your user. That's important. Questions? So I'll try to put together some kind of demo for you next week. It all depends on how crazy my week's gonna be. I have some old stuff that I can probably find. I used to do a lot more demo in my security classes, but it's just sometimes like I get busy and then I don't get to put things together as much anymore. But I'll find some of my old stuff and then I'll show you why we should use strong password. From a risk assessor standpoint, like what tools do we use, so you can see how that's done, and then, or even on the wireless side. If I have time, I'll put together something wireless. If not, I'll show next time. But okay, question? All right. Yes.
I'm just kind of curious to see what kind of security software you would recommend.
Like, what do you mean security software? Like security tools, security application, like anti-malware?
Yeah, exactly. Anti-malware, like Bitdefender, ESET, Avast, Kaspersky.
Avast and Bitdefender a little resource hungry in my opinion. I've used, AVG, a lot of these mainstream ones, and they change from year to year on how well they work. From an enterprise standpoint, Symantec is good for like networking and scanning servers and devices, and it's good running in the back without sucking up a lot of your resources. But Defender is okay. When I used to use it on my computer, I felt like there was some part it was false negative where it wasn't detecting some of the things that I came across. Right now, like I'm on this one, I use Avira. And I usually look for like the top 5, the top 10 to use. But Avast, AVG, McAfee is yes and no. I run it on my smartphone because it was something that free came with the service. And it does its job, but you also need to really configure it and run it. So to really answer your question, I don't really have a favorite actually. It really depends on the system, the use of that system, and then how heavily I want it to scan. But Norton seems to really be the favorites for a lot of the network administrator and the security administrator from an enterprise standpoint. And I've worked with Symantec for a long time. So, but yeah, what do you use? I should ask.
Oh, okay, yeah, now you got me thinking because I'm using Bitdefender right now. I mean, I switched over from Kaspersky.
Yeah.
But yeah, right now I do Bitdefender because it's very low impact, and every time I use Symantec and Norton, McAfee, I've always felt like it was a resource hog.
Right. Kaspersky is okay. They do a lot of research relating to malware. They do a lot of reverse engineering, which is good. But there's question about, where the company originated, are they affiliated with, you know, Russian researchers and such. So there's like a lot of talk that's not legitimate about their company. I've worked with Trend Micro, and Trend Micro had come up quite a bit since way back when they first started. So they started with the mobile platform, and then they really transitioned themselves to network environment. So you do see company that's using Trend Micro. And, you know, and then there are other products now that are great too. So you see some of the newer companies that are taking over this type of products. So you can see, you know, so we don't really have one solution for everything. You have to think of it that way. So when you saying, you know, is there a catch-all security suite? Not really. You have to really look at specific solutions for the use of that system from here on out, because that kind of narrow down. It's easier for us to determine the risk based on that. Okay.
Okay. Thank you very much.
You're welcome. Other questions? Okay. So that's a perfect tie into what we need to talk about as far as your project. Zone Alarm is free, and it's a good firewall tool for filter. Zone Alarm been around for a long time, and you're gonna see, you know, some of the security lab have you install Zone Alarm, but your Windows firewall is the basis. So if you want something to, you know, if you don't have anything else, you should use your Windows firewall or your system firewall. But Zone Alarm is also a good free one to use as far as filtering traffic and activities. Okay. All right. So let's talk about what we have to do for the project. The way I approach this project, so I rewrote it like 5 times throughout, you know, before putting it up for you, because I kind of wanted to see how we can address some of the security issues that you have for personal use or even small business, but at the same time allowing you to do it. It's difficult when we're doing it virtually because, you know, everybody has different systems. So I don't want to take on something that, you know, we would have a virtual machine. It will be too much work on your end to be able to keep up with that. So here's the hands-on project. Okay, and you can find that in here. And then I'll drop in the file for those of you who don't have access yet in a little bit. But what I want you to be aware of is that you are visible on the internet. You are visible to some people who really want to look, right? So the whole point of this is to show you that what kind of things from an external standpoint, what kind of things can they see? So the first question is to have you look at the type of security application for anti-malware and, you know, web surfing and stuff like that. So you pick the ones that you would like to use. What I would suggest is to research the top 10 for 2020, right? And then kind of read the perspective on some of the articles, because sometimes they are paid to advertise certain product. So, you know, kind of research the ones that you think would be best based on, and it's ranked differently every year. So for 2020, as we close out this year, the last quarter of this year, and then next week, I will share with you some statistic that's been done by some research on the malware. So I want you to look at your smartphone and your computer. Okay, what tool will be best for those? Then PickU is a website that people would use to search for individuals. Okay, I'm going to use myself because I have web presence. So for work and sometimes for personal. And some companies, they would use a website like this to do background. Sometimes people would just pay for some public information that can be acquired through companies like this. So you don't have to put in your own personal identity if you feel like it's not. You can just use another person you know, only because I want you to see if it's accurate or not. So I'm going to show you mine. Okay. And once you have web presence, you cannot get away from that. It's really hard to get rid of all of this, really. I had worked with someone to be able to clean up their data online. And it's very difficult to do. Okay. So we can narrow down specific location. So out of all of this record is true. I am 42. I'm turning 43 next week. And these are the cities that I have lived in. Okay. So, and then it even ties in family members. So where do they really get some of this? People that work for a public entity, they might have put me down for, you know, as relatives for background check. I have a cousin that works for FBI. So he had to fill out all the people that were living with him in the household at that time. And we went to college together. So, you know, and then tax records, you know, property tax information, death certificate, birth certificate. Some of that public information makes its way to the data that's present on the web. And then your social network information. So it's somewhat simply easy to really find someone. And with that, you can also find companies, right? And which is the next part that I want to show you. So here is just to find someone, right? So what I want you to do with that part is to see if the information that's on the web is accurate to you, right? Like if you simply Google yourself, right? If you don't show up on there, that's good. At younger age, I think when I do this with high school and middle school, they're not on there that much because of still like, you know, because they're underage. But as adult, you're going to see more of it, okay? Because it ties you to different things, like I said, public information. And then also people supply your information to things like, you know, to determine their genetics and stuff like that. So that type of database, you know, it's accessible by other resources. So like 23andMe, those type of things. And that's how our government find, right, in cases where they find killers, right, murderers that have been going through life all these years undetected. So there's benefit and there's disadvantage, of course, how we use our data. So after you use PQ, put down the information, and then next is going to be our encrypted email. So let's say that you feel like you want to really use secure email. You can use these resources. And there are only a few of them that offer you free. The majority of them, right, would try to capitalize because it's service that they provide to you. But if you want to encrypt your communication, you can check out these. Proton is good. And some of these are better than other, depending on the interface, you know, the type of service they offer. So I want you to check them out and possibly consider it if you want to use it. I personally, for work, I don't use encryption because it's just so tedious and resource heavy. But in the case where if I do work on a contract that's very important, that's very secretive, then I would use encrypted email. So keep in mind that that's something, let's say that if you need to send something to your family member that's very sensitive, then yeah, consider using encrypted email. Question? Okay. Tor, as some of you know, that Tor is used for as an onion browser, right? And so Tor browser is used so that way people cannot follow your traffic. It's a way of jumping around and not be able to be detected. And before, when we use this, we have to install it and be able to run it or enable certain services for it. But you can also use it with the USB. Like you can download it to USB and you can plug it into different system to use it. And Tor project is open source. So how does the attacker goes undetected? They use onion router, right? So it's a logic way for us to mask our traffic instead of using like VPNs and certain services. But VPN on the web VPN that you use, that's not fully undetected, right? Like if somebody really investigate, they can find your traffic by getting authorization to look at the network traffic from the service provider, because you're still going through the service provider network, okay? So look at your Tor project and consider, would you consider using the USB for your web browsing? Why or why not, right? And then instant messaging. So these are some of the resources that you can use for secure instant message, or I'm sorry, SMS, direct message on your phone. There's Signal, Wire, and Telegram, okay? You can find others, but these are some of the common ones. So if you want to encrypt your text messages, you can do that. Now this goes back to the discussion of, you know, our nation welfare and things like that. In the case where certain terrorist group using these type of services to communicate back and forth and disposable phones and such, right? The services are available. How people use it is really, right? They have discretion on how they use it. But, you know, then the question would be, should our government look into these things? Should they have the authority to do that? In China, right, their government look at everything. So if you really want to be secretive, you would use VPN and you would use Tor and you would use other type of service. But for us, you know, going back to the Snowden case, it's infringement of your rights. So should our government really look into that? Is that something that is allowed, right? People say that Big Brother is always watching. Every nation, they look into their people. It's not just us. It's Europe. It's, you know, every nation. If you're looking at the UK, they monitor traffic too. So, you know, is that questionable about, you know, what is the extension of our rights? What is really considered private or privacy? So going through security, you're going to see that apparently things are private, and is it really private? So there's always that gray area where we would say, should we keep it completely private, like Cloudflare, how they got in trouble for hosting ISIS activity, and then Anonymous attacked them, right? And then, you know, when it went all the way to Supreme Court, they said that, well, it's a customer and we paid them. Okay. So take a look at these resources that I'm giving you. And all I'm asking is, would you consider using this as part of your messaging tool? Okay. Why or why not? Okay. So that's going to be the project for the next couple of weeks. This is not due until the following week. So, okay. All right. Okay, so that's the project. Then let's talk about the lab. Sorry, we're running out of time here too. If you don't have access to Canvas yet, you will be able to, and I'm using Practice Lab this week. Okay, so this is a super easy lab. They're gonna have you go and use a virtual machine, and you're gonna install Windows Defender and run it, right? And then you're gonna have, you know, you're gonna use some of the security tool on it. So it shows you how you can protect the client system. Here is the link to the lab. Once you're in, you click on week 1 lab, And for those of you who haven't used Practice Lab, just keep in mind that you have to enable pop-up blocker from Practice Lab. So with that, because here's all our virtual machine that we're gonna have access to, but you're only gonna use the Windows 10 and the server, which is the BDC01. This runs server 2016. Okay. If you're not sure how to use it, you can watch the brief tutorial, the video that they have. Now, the two virtual machine, it's listed on page 1. So your instruction is on the left. And it tells you that you're going to use the BDC1 and the Windows 10. Okay, so the domain controller and the member. And as you see, it pops up my virtual machine, which is, this is the server. That might take a little bit. So once everybody's on it, it does slow down a little bit. Be patient, or you can come back to it and use it later. And it's not due until next Saturday. So you should have time to go through it. So I'm going to do a quick run through it. This lab is very short. So you're going to, after you review the instruction on the left, you can click next to go to the next page. This, you're going to use Windows 10 to install or update, actually update Windows Defender, which is Microsoft built-in anti-malware. It's good. So student asked me, well, you know, can I use this for a lot of things? Yeah, sure. It's kind of like having a fence around the house, right? Like your castle. You can have a little fence, like a picket fence with a lock on it, or you can have big iron fence. You can have dogs, you can have security guards to protect your castle. So some tools are better than other with the features, and you know, the important part when you're looking at anti-malware is the capability with that. We talk about how it can look at behavior and it would have signature. Most of the free ones is they're going to give you the signature one, which is the file pattern. Okay. Now, some of the more advanced one, it's going to look at, you know, existing known behavior and possible behavior of a malware. And those sometimes tend to be false positive, but, right, it has additional capability. So the first part, it walks you through on how to use Windows Defender. To start the virtual machine, you simply just click it on, and then it will turn on when it's ready. And then you would get a separate pop-up, and then you would click on it to be able to connect to it and work. So we would use our browser to connect to our virtual machine remotely. Okay, so this is the lab environment. So here you go, see? And in the case where you do get this connection, here's the connection button. Okay, and then there's some utility here that you can use. So, and in the virtual machine, there's desktop. So once it's finishing loading, you simply just follow the instruction. It tells you to click on the start, search for Windows Defender or Defender, and be able to launch it. Okay. So very easy steps on how to use Windows Defender and run the update. Make sure you update your anti-malware at least a few times a week if you're on the internet every day like I am, right? I run it whenever I'm on. I don't schedule it because sometimes that pulls my resources, because sometimes I use my RAM and my hard drive and my processor for other things that relate to my work. So okay, so follow the instructions. You can also, it shows you on how you can change the settings on it. So at the minimal level, we should be using Windows Defender if we don't have anything else. Okay. And as I told you, I use Avira, and then I pay for the license to get the full Avira. You can use something for free, like Bitdefender. A lot of people use Bitdefender. Okay, after you update it, you can scan. You can pick specific files to scan, or you can scan the entire system. Okay, now here it shows you how you can use Internet Explorer okay? And then you can use the Microsoft Security Scanner. Keep in mind that this is a security scanner that's offered by Microsoft. A lot of the companies, they don't do online scanning. You can submit a malware to them and they can sandbox it, they can test it, right? And they can see if they can discover it's a malware. So I know Kaspersky does that, and McAfee does that. So some of the companies, they would ask the user if they do find something that they cannot fix, you can submit it, and so they can find solution for it. So there's some sandboxing opportunity there. Okay, so Microsoft allows you to use the scanner through their website, but the majority of the company, like I said, you have to install. End user license agreement. When you use it, you have to agree to it. And all that is just a safety scanner. I feel like their scans are okay. It's not as advanced as some of the security tools that you see in the market, but it would do if you don't, if at the lowest level. Okay, so this takes a little bit for it to scan through and then give you the results. So it shows you how to do that. Okay. I would demo it, and then while you do it, but with Zoom, sometimes this takes forever to get things running. And then here it shows you how to change your pop-up blocker settings. All you have to do is go back to your browser and you can enable a lot of the security areas. So that will be probably our next project. Is I'll see if I can write a setup instruction for different browser that you likely use, like Firefox or Chrome, or on Apple you might use Safari. And you can also enable a lot of the features or disable it for your browser. So in this part, I think it's going to lead you into having the add-ins. So some of the website would have add-ins for, different components of their website to load. In the past, we used to use Flash for videos. That's outdated. We would use Java to run some of these things, even like Practice Lab uses Java and HTML5. And in the Microsoft environment, you would use, I want to say, different packages, different tools, and you're going to see that when you go through the exercises. Okay, so it shows you how you can configure the tools and for your browser to really filter and set up so that way you can have proper access on the web that's safe. Okay. Now the padlock just shows security, but it doesn't really tell us, it doesn't give us the true essential security. And then we touch on certificates, so it shows you. So every site that you access that's secure, it has to issue you a certificate, including Canvas, right? And some certificate would contain more information than others. Some certificate would have expiration, right? A lot of your app certificates doesn't have expiration. So that way you can continue to use the app forever and ever. Some website would ask to renew the certificate, and certificate really pertain to, your role, right, in that session, especially when we're looking at the web, like what can you do? And it also really tie back to your authentication, your identity, who you are, and so forth. Now, next we're going to talk about like man-in-the-middle attack and different things. So we'll take a look at how that ties to an external perspective on what the attacker would see when the user's on the web. Okay, any question? Okay, so fairly short. This should take you less than an hour to do. Okay, so once you're done, do all the tasks that ask. Screenshot, and then if it has assessment, answer the assessment, and then most important, click done. At this point, if you finish all that's required, it's going to bring the activity over to Canvas. So that way it will go into your grade book. If you don't click done, it's just going to, you know, at the end, they're going to send a report and it's going to give you a lower grade. So make sure. Now, if you don't complete all the activities and click done, it's going to give you a partial grade. Okay. Question. Michelle asks, how many times can your internet communication bounce around before you get to its destination, depending on your destination? So remember we talked about routing last time, right, in the networking class? It will bounce to specific location based on the availability. And the way Tor works is that it will bounce around so much that it's more difficult to monitor. So it's a router. The way it logically sits is it's being routed many times. That's why they call it the onion router. Okay.
So it can be unlimited.
And possibly unlimited. The way they have it is it's really depending on the source and the destination. Because yes.
So it's hard to, like, if you're an analyst and trying to track the source, you know, in TV shows, they always show how they're trying to track the source and they can't because it's bouncing all over the place.
Yeah. So what you have to do is you have to follow it to each point. And that requires skills and patience and time, manpower, right? So if you have a team to do this, it's a lot better than having one person, because yes, you have to footprint it all the way back. Everybody have to have some kind of service provider or use a service provider, right? You would start there. Okay. Leaving that network, where does it go? Okay. So you have to follow their traffic, and it would bounce to, you know, Europe, Africa, Asia sometime back, because there are, you know, systems and proxies that the traffic can be sent to, sure. But, you know, sometimes it's a lot and sometimes it's not. So yeah, doing blind assessment is challenging, but it's rewarding at the end. You will feel like you accomplish a lot and you learn a lot doing it too. Like you can talk to people who've been doing it for a long time. They might have, and you would acquire tools as you go too. Sometimes you see, oh, well, these are the tools that I have and it doesn't work. And so I have to look at new ones, write new script, write different things to make it work. Okay. So that's to come in the Python classes. All right. So I would let you do your lab. I would finish the session now so I can post your video. All my videos for all my lecture, for all my classes is on my YouTube channel. And there are some other videos. I know I haven't put up the tutorial for the building a PC ones because I haven't finished editing the videos. And then I just bought a new case for it from Prime Day. So I have to swap out all the stuff and then I'm re-recording. So I will put those up on my channel if you want to watch it later. It will be short, it won't be long. And then hopefully I can demo something next week. So let me work on that this week. And I will see you here next Saturday. Type your name into the chat, please, so I can get your attendance for today. And I'm gonna stick around for question. Bye. Have a good one.
Thank you. Have a good day.
All right, you too. Have a good one. Complete your lab and exercises.
Yes, I will.
Have a good weekend.
You too. Bye.